The sound of hoofbeats pounded against the hard, packed earth as Isaac Caldwell raced his chestnut stallion across the open plains of Wyoming Territory. 1875. Dark clouds gathering on the horizon, promising a storm that matched the one in his heart. The 28-year-old cowboy had just buried his father, the last of his kin, leaving the modest cattle ranch solely in his weathered hands. His father's final words echoed in his mind as the first drops of rain began to fall. "Don't end up alone like your old man, son." Isaac pulled his hat lower as the rain intensified, squinting through the downpour at the faint outline of what appeared to be a covered wagon tilted awkwardly on the side of the trail ahead. As he drew closer, he noticed it had been abandoned, one wheel broken beyond repair, supplies scattered about as if someone had searched through them hastily. A thin trail of smoke curled from a small fire beneath a rocky overhang nearby. Cautiously approaching, hand resting on the revolver at his hip, Isaac called out, "Hello there. Anyone in need of assistance?" The only response was the crackling of the dying fire. Isaac dismounted, securing his horse to a nearby tree before investigating further. As he neared the overhang, he spotted a figure huddled against the rock face, wrapped in a thin blanket. "Madam," he questioned, recognizing the outline of a woman's form. "Are you hurt?" She startled at his voice, turning quickly with wide, fearful eyes. In that moment, Isaac's breath caught in his throat. The young woman's face bore a series of scars, one prominent line running from her right temple down to her jaw, another crossing the bridge of her nose. But it wasn't the scars that stopped him cold, it was the depth of sorrow in her eyes, a pain that seemed bottomless. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rain. "I mean no harm, just passing through." Isaac removed his hat, water streaming from the brim. "Neither do I, madam." "Name's Isaac Caldwell. I've got a ranch about 5 miles east. That's your wagon down there," she nodded hesitantly. "It was. Wheel broke 2 days ago. Men came yesterday, took my horses, most of my supplies." Her hands trembled as she pulled the blanket tighter. "Said a woman shouldn't be traveling alone." "They hurt you?" Isaac asked, anger flaring in his chest. "No more than others have," she replied with a bitterness that spoke volumes. "They took what they wanted and left." The rain fell harder now, the overhang providing minimal protection. Isaac glanced at the darkening sky, then back at the woman. "Miss, I can't leave you out here. Storm's getting worse and these parts aren't safe after dark. My ranch isn't much, but there's a warm fire and dry clothes waiting." Suspicion clouded her features. "Why would you help me?" Isaac considered her question seriously. "Because my ma raised me right before the consumption took her, and because no one should be alone in a storm." He extended his hand. "I don't know your name yet, but I promise you'll be safe at my place until you decide where you're headed." She studied him for a long moment, weighing her limited options against the sincerity in his eyes. "Faith," she finally said. "Faith Porter." Isaac nodded, respecting the courage it took for her to trust a stranger. "Well, Miss Porter, we should gather whatever's worth saving from your wagon and get moving before this weather turns meaner." Together they salvaged what remained of Faith's possessions, a small trunk of clothing, a leather-bound journal, and a few family keepsakes. Isaac secured them to his saddle before helping Faith mount his horse. He walked alongside, leading them through the worsening storm toward the promise of shelter. The Caldwell Ranch came into view just as dusk settled across the land, a modest cabin with a barn and corral, smoke rising from the chimney where Isaac had left a banked fire that morning. Faith remained silent as Isaac helped her dismount, her exhaustion evident in the slump of her shoulders. "It's not much," Isaac said, suddenly self-conscious of his simple home, "but it's dry and warm." Inside, Isaac busied himself stoking the fire and preparing a simple meal while Faith stood awkwardly by the door, clutching her small bag of possessions. "The bedroom's through there," Isaac said, nodding toward a doorway covered by a curtain. "You can rest there. I'll take the chair by the fire." Faith shook her head. "I can't take your bed." "Madam Faith, you're not taking anything I'm not freely offering." Isaac's voice was gentle but firm. "Get some rest. Things will look clearer in the morning." After a simple meal of beans and cornbread, Faith retreated to the bedroom. Isaac settled into his chair by the fire, listening to the rain hammer against the roof, wondering about the woman whose scars seemed to run far deeper than the visible marks on her face. Morning brought clear skies and an awkward silence between them. Faith emerged from the bedroom in the same travel-worn dress, her dark hair neatly braided. "I should be moving on," she announced, though her voice lacked conviction. Isaac looked up from the eggs he was frying. "Nearest town's river cross, about 20 miles south." "No stage runs for another 3 days." Faith's shoulders tensed. "I have money. I can pay for lodging there." "Didn't say you couldn't," Isaac replied evenly. "But there's plenty needs doing around here if you'd like to earn your keep for a few days. Might be safer than waiting alone in town." Faith's eyes narrowed slightly. "What kind of work?" "Garden needs tending. Shirts need mending. I'm not much with a needle." He slid a plate of eggs toward her. "And I could use some help with the calving. Got 3 cows ready to drop any day now." For the first time, a hint of something other than fear or suspicion crossed Faith's face, consideration, perhaps even interest. "I grew up on a farm in Missouri. I know about calving." Isaac nodded, hiding his surprise. "Then you know it's better to have 2 pairs of hands." Faith ate silently, considering his offer. Finally, she spoke. 3 days, then I'll decide whether to continue to River Cross." Isaac extended his hand. "Fair deal, Miss Porter." Those 3 days stretched into a week as spring storms made the roads impassable. Faith proved herself capable and hardworking, rising before dawn to help with chores, tending to the vegetable garden with a knowledge that impressed Isaac. She spoke little of her past, and Isaac didn't pry, though questions burned in his mind every time he caught her absently tracing the scars on her face. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Isaac finally ventured a personal question. "Where were you headed, Faith, before your wagon broke down?" Faith was quiet for so long Isaac thought she might not answer. "Oregon," she finally said. "My cousin has a millinery shop in Portland. She offered me work." Isaac nodded, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. "Long journey for a woman alone." "Safer than staying where I was," she replied, her voice hard. Isaac turned to look at her, the fading light catching the ridges of her scars. "Your husband?" he asked quietly. Faith's bitter laugh held no humor. "My father arranged the marriage. Richard Porter was respected in our town, businessman, church deacon." Her fingers unconsciously traced the scar across her nose. Behind closed doors, he was a different man, especially when he drank. Isaac's hands clenched into fists. "He's the one who, the first time was an accident," he claimed. "The others were lessons." Faith's voice was devoid of emotion, as if she were reciting someone else's story. "After 5 years, I realized he would eventually kill me, so when he left for a business trip to St. Louis, I took what money I could find and left." "He looking for you?" Faith shrugged. "He might be. Or he might have found another wife to torment by now. Either way, I'm not going back." They sat in silence as darkness fell, the weight of her confession hanging between them. Eventually, Isaac spoke, his voice low and earnest. "No one will hurt you here, Faith. You have my word." For the first time since her arrival, Faith's lips curved into the ghost of a smile, small, cautious, yet genuine. The sight of it struck Isaac like a physical blow, cleaving his heart in two. In that moment, he knew he would do anything to protect this wounded woman, to see that smile grow stronger, to erase the pain that had carved those lines into her flesh. As spring fully claimed the Wyoming landscape, Faith's presence transformed the Caldwell ranch. The cabin, once merely functional, now held touches of comfort, wildflowers in jars on the table, curtains sewn from feed sacks framing the windows. The garden flourished under her care, promising vegetables for the coming months. Isaac found himself rising each morning with an unfamiliar lightness in his chest, anticipating Faith's presence at the breakfast table. Their conversations grew longer, easier. He discovered she had a quick mind and a dry wit that emerged in unexpected moments. She learned he had a talent for storytelling, especially tales of his childhood adventures with his older brother, lost years ago to a riding accident. The question of her departure faded into an unspoken understanding she would stay, at least for now. Isaac paid her fair wages for her work, which she carefully saved in a tin box beneath her bed, though he suspected she no longer dreamed of Oregon with the same urgency. One afternoon in late April, Isaac returned from checking fence lines to find Faith kneeling in the garden, her face lifted to the sun, eyes closed in a rare moment of peaceful repose. He paused, struck by how different she looked from the frightened woman he'd found huddled beneath that rocky overhang. The scars remained, but they no longer seemed to define her. As if sensing his presence, Faith opened her eyes and turned toward him. "The tomato seedlings are coming along nicely," she said, brushing dirt from her hands. "You've worked miracles with that garden," Isaac replied, approaching to examine her handiwork. "My attempts never yielded much beyond weeds." Faith smiled, those moments coming more frequently now, and Isaac felt that familiar ache in his chest, a bittersweet fracturing that occurred whenever joy illuminated her features. "I've always found peace in growing things," she said, rising to her feet. "My grandmother taught me. Said you can tell a lot about a person by how they tend a garden." "And what does mine say about me?" Isaac asked, genuinely curious. Faith studied him, amusement dancing in her eyes. "That you're better with cattle than carrots." Isaac laughed, the sound carrying across the open yard. "Can't argue with that assessment." Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary, an unspoken current passing between them before Faith looked away, suddenly self-conscious. "I should start supper," she said, brushing past him toward the cabin. Isaac watched her go, wrestling with feelings he hadn't anticipated when he'd offered her shelter that stormy afternoon. He knew the proper thing would be to keep his distance, to respect the boundaries of their arrangement. Faith had suffered enough at the hands of men. The last thing she needed was unwanted attention from another. Yet as spring deepened into summer, the connection between them grew stronger. They fell into comfortable routines, sharing meals, working side by side, sitting on the porch in the evenings while Isaac read aloud from one of the few books he owned. Faith began to speak more freely of her childhood, of the loving mother she'd lost to fever, of dreams she'd abandoned when her father had arranged her marriage. Isaac shared his own hopes as well, expanding the herd, perhaps building a larger house someday. Neither of them acknowledged how these future plans seemed to include the other, the possibility hanging unspoken between them. The delicate balance of their relationship shifted one July afternoon when a rider appeared on the horizon, approaching the ranch at a casual pace. Isaac was mending a fence while Faith hung laundry in the yard. They both paused, watching the stranger's approach with varying degrees of apprehension. "Stay by the house," Isaac instructed Faith, moving to intercept the visitor. The rider was a middle-aged man with a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest, his expression friendly but official as he reined his horse to a stop. "Afternoon," the sheriff called. "Isaac Caldwell, isn't it?" Isaac nodded, relaxing slightly at the recognition. "Sheriff Donovan from Rivercross." "What brings you out this way?" The sheriff dismounted, removing his hat respectfully. "Partly social, partly official. Haven't seen you in town for some time. Wanted to make sure everything was all right out here after your father's passing." "Managing fine, thank you," Isaac replied, extending his hand, which the sheriff shook firmly. Sheriff Donovan's gaze drifted toward Faith, who stood tensely by the clothesline. "Also had some inquiries I'm following up on. Looking for a woman traveling alone, possibly headed west. Dark hair, mid-20s. He pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket. "Husband's mighty concerned about her, says she's not in her right mind." Isaac's face remained impassive, though his heart raced. "Lot of folks passing through these days. Haven't noticed anyone matching that description." The sheriff unfolded the paper, a crude sketch of a woman's face, the features only vaguely resembling Faith's, with no indication of her scars. Name's Faith Porter. Husband's offering a substantial reward for information leading to her safe return. Isaac casually stepped to block the sheriff's view of Faith. Like I said, Sheriff, been keeping to myself since Pa died. Haven't seen anyone matching that description. Sheriff Donovan studied Isaac's face, then glanced again toward Faith, who had turned away, busying herself with the laundry. That your wife, Caldwell? Don't recall you being married. Housekeeper, Isaac answered smoothly. Miss Franklin, hired her on after Pa passed. Place was becoming a mess. The sheriff nodded slowly, clearly not entirely convinced. Well, if you do hear anything about this Porter woman, there's $50 waiting in Rivercross for information. Husband sounds real worried. I'll keep that in mind, Isaac replied, his tone making it clear the conversation was concluded. After the sheriff departed, Faith's hands trembled so violently she dropped the shirt she'd been folding. Isaac crossed the yard quickly, catching her elbow as she swayed on her feet. He's looking for me, she whispered, her face ashen. Richard found me. He hasn't found anything, Isaac assured her, guiding her to sit on the porch steps. That sketch barely resembled you, and there was no mention of your scars. Sheriff has no reason to connect you to the woman he's seeking. Faith shook her head, panic rising in her eyes. I need to leave. If Richard traces me here, he'll… Faith. Isaac knelt before her, gently taking her cold hands in his. Listen to me, you're safe here. I won't let anyone take you back to that man, not the sheriff, not anyone. You don't understand what he's capable of, Faith insisted. Then help me understand, Isaac urged. Tell me everything so I can protect you properly. As twilight descended over the plains, Faith revealed the full extent of her marriage, the isolation, the accusations, the escalating violence that had left both physical and invisible scars. How Richard Porter, respected businessman and church deacon, had systematically broken her spirit over 5 years of marriage, convincing their community that his wife was unstable, prone to accidents and self-harm. The night I decided to leave, Faith concluded, her voice hollow, he held a knife to my throat for spilling his coffee, said next time he'd finish what he started. Her fingers traced the longest scar on her face. I knew then it was flee or die. Isaac listened, rage building inside him at the cruelties this woman had endured. When she finished speaking, he reached up, hesitating briefly before gently touching her cheek, his thumb brushing the raised line of her scar. These marks don't make you less, he said softly. They show your strength. You survived, Faith. Faith's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't pull away from his touch. Something shifted between them in that moment, a boundary crossed, a truth acknowledged. I can't ask you to risk yourself for me, she whispered. If the sheriff returns, let me worry about Sheriff Donovan. Isaac's voice was firm with resolve. This is your home now if you want it to be. The word home hung in the air between them, laden with meaning beyond mere shelter. Faith's eyes searched his, seeking the truth behind his offer. And what am I to you, Isaac Caldwell? She asked, vulnerability and courage mingling in her question. Isaac drew a deep breath, knowing his answer would change everything between them. You're the woman who brought life back to this ranch, the one who makes me look forward to each sunrise. His voice dropped lower. The one whose smile breaks my heart and heals it all at once. Faith's breath caught, her lips parting in surprise at his confession. Slowly, deliberately, she leaned forward until her forehead rested against his. I never thought I could trust a man again, she whispered. Never thought I deserved anything but running and hiding. You deserve everything, Isaac responded, his words a solemn vow. Their first kiss was tentative, gentle, a question asked and answered in the meeting of lips, the careful embrace that followed. When they finally parted, Faith's smile was tremulous but real, lighting her eyes in a way Isaac had never seen before. The following weeks were a revelation for both of them. Isaac courted Faith properly, bringing wildflowers from the meadow, carving a delicate wooden box for her keepsakes. Faith blossomed under his attentions, her confidence growing daily. Though she remained cautious about visiting town, she no longer startled at every approaching rider or unexpected sound. But their fragile happiness was tested in early September when Sheriff Donovan returned, this time accompanied by a well-dressed man whose pinched face held none of the concern one might expect from a worried husband. Isaac spotted the approaching riders while working in the corral and hurried to the house, finding Faith kneading bread dough in the kitchen. "Richard's here," he said without preamble. "With the sheriff. Get your things and hide in the root cellar. Don't come out until I come for you." Faith's face drained of color, but she moved quickly, gathering her most precious possessions into a small bag before disappearing through the trapdoor in the pantry floor. Isaac closed it carefully, covering it with a rug before stepping onto the porch to meet the visitors. Richard Porter dismounted with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to being respected. His expensive suit and gold watch chain marked him as prosperous, his practiced smile never reaching his cold eyes. "Mr. Caldwell," Sheriff Donovan called. "Hope you don't mind us stopping by. This here is Mr. Porter looking for his wife we discussed earlier." Isaac nodded tersely. "Sheriff, Mr. Porter." Richard Porter stepped forward, extending his hand, which Isaac reluctantly shook. "Appreciate your time, Mr. Caldwell. I've been searching for my dear Faith for months now. She's not well, I'm afraid, prone to delusions, sometimes violent outbursts." "Sorry to hear that," Isaac replied neutrally. "As I told the sheriff before, I haven't seen anyone matching your wife's description." Porter's smile tightened. "Mind if we have a look around? Sheriff has a warrant." He produced a folded document from his coat pocket. "Just to ease my mind." Isaac glanced at the sheriff, who at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Standard procedure in these cases, Caldwell. Won't take but a minute." "Fine," Isaac agreed, his tone clipped, "but I'll accompany you." The search was thorough, Porter examining every room with predatory intensity while Isaac followed closely, tense as a cornered wolf. When they reached the kitchen, Porter paused, running his finger along the counter where traces of flour remained from Faith's bread making. "You bake, Mr. Caldwell?" he asked, his tone insinuating. "Housekeeper comes twice weekly," Isaac lied smoothly. "Must have been here earlier." Porter's eyes narrowed slightly, but he continued his inspection. When they had searched every visible space, Isaac began to relax until Porter's boot caught the edge of the rug covering the trapdoor, shifting it slightly. "What's this?" he asked, nudging the rug aside with his foot. "Root cellar," Isaac answered, his hand instinctively moving closer to his holstered revolver. "For storing vegetables through winter." Porter looked up, catching the subtle movement. A calculating smile spread across his face. "I'd like to see it." The sheriff, sensing the rising tension, stepped forward. "Mr. Porter, we've searched the house." "I don't think my wife could be hiding anywhere, Sheriff," Porter interrupted, his voice hardening. "I insist on being thorough." Isaac moved between Porter and the trapdoor. "It's dark down there." "Full of spiders, nothing to see." Porter's pretense of civility vanished. "She's here, isn't she?" he demanded, his refined accent giving way to something harsher. "You're hiding my property, Caldwell." "Property?" Isaac repeated, disgust evident in his voice. "Is that what you call the woman you scarred and terrorized?" Porter lunged forward, attempting to shove Isaac aside, but the cowboy stood firm. The sheriff moved between them, hands raised placatingly. "Let's all calm down," he urged. "Mr. Porter, I don't see evidence your wife is here, Mr. Caldwell. No need for this to turn ugly." "Too late for that," Porter spat, his handsome face contorted with rage. "This man is harboring my runaway wife. I demand you arrest him." Before the sheriff could respond, the trapdoor lifted. Faith emerged slowly from the root cellar, her face pale but resolute. "I'm here, Richard," she said, her voice steadier than Isaac expected. "There's no need to threaten anyone." Porter's expression shifted to one of smug triumph. "Faith, darling, I've been so worried." He turned to the sheriff. "You see, just as I said. Now, Sheriff, I'll take my wife home." "Faith," Isaac began, but she shook her head slightly, silently asking him to wait. Faith stepped forward, standing tall despite her obvious fear. "Sheriff Donovan, I left my husband because I feared for my life." She gestured to her scarred face. "These weren't accidents or self-harm as he's likely told you. This is what happens when Richard Porter doesn't get his way." The sheriff looked uncomfortable, glancing between Faith and Porter. "Madam, this is a domestic matter, it's attempted murder," Faith interrupted, her voice growing stronger. "And I have proof." She reached into her pocket, withdrawing a folded document. "Before I left Missouri, I visited Dr. Marshall, who treated my injuries over the years. He documented everything, despite Richard's influence in town. Said he couldn't live with his conscience anymore." Porter lunged toward Faith, but Isaac intercepted him, slamming him against the wall with a forearm pressed against his throat. "Touch her again, and it'll be the last thing you do," Isaac growled. The sheriff took the document from Faith, reading it with growing concern. It detailed years of suspicious injuries, the doctor's notes clearly indicating they were inconsistent with the explanations provided. Porter's name appeared throughout, along with the doctor's professional opinion that Faith Porter was in danger. "Mr. Porter," the sheriff said slowly, "these are serious allegations." "She's lying," Porter choked out, still restrained by Isaac. "She's mentally unstable. I also have these," Faith continued, producing several letters from her pocket. "From Richard to his business partner, discussing what to do with me if I became too troublesome, specifically mentioning an accident that would leave him free to remarry." The sheriff's expression hardened as he scanned the incriminating letters. "Mr. Porter, I think you'd better come with me back to Rivercross. We have some matters to discuss." "This is absurd," Porter sputtered as Isaac released him. "She's my wife, I have rights." "You have the right to a fair hearing," Sheriff Donovan replied, his hand moving to rest on his holstered pistol. "Which is more than you apparently planned for her." As the sheriff led a fuming Richard Porter from the house, Faith sagged against the table, the strength that had carried her through the confrontation draining away. Isaac moved to her side, supporting her gently. "That was the bravest thing I've ever witnessed," he murmured against her hair. Faith looked up at him, tears gleaming in her eyes. "I was terrified, but I couldn't let him hurt you too." "What happens now?" Isaac asked, his arm still protectively around her waist. "The sheriff will wire Missouri for confirmation of the doctor's statement. There will be a hearing." Faith drew a shaky breath. "For the first time, I believe someone might actually listen to me." In the aftermath of Richard Porter's arrest, Faith's transformation accelerated. The woman who had once flinched at sudden movements now stood tall in the Rivercross courthouse, testifying clearly about her years of abuse. With Dr. Marshall's documented evidence and the damning letters, Richard Porter was sentenced to prison for attempted murder and conspiracy, his respectability and influence insufficient to counter the evidence against him. The legal proceedings to dissolve their marriage began immediately, with the judge sympathetic to Faith's circumstances. By Christmas, Faith Porter would legally reclaim her maiden name of Winters and her freedom. Through it all, Isaac remained steadfastly by her side, attending every hearing, his silent support a foundation she could rely upon. The town of Rivercross, initially suspicious of the scarred woman and her cowboy defender, gradually warmed to the couple as the truth of Faith's ordeal became known. On a crisp October evening, as golden light bathed the plains in amber hues, Isaac and Faith sat on their porch, for it was truly theirs now, in heart if not yet in law. Faith's hand rested comfortably in Isaac's as they watched the sunset paint the horizon. "I've been thinking," Isaac said, breaking their companionable silence. "That bedroom curtain doesn't make much sense anymore." Faith turned to him, brow furrowed in confusion. "The curtain?" "The one separating your room from mine," Isaac clarified, his voice gentle but determined. "I'm suggesting we might not need it anymore, if you're amenable, that is." Understanding dawned in Faith's eyes, a blush coloring her cheeks. "Isaac Caldwell, are you proposing to me?" Isaac shifted to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "I reckon I am, though not very elegantly." His thumbs traced circles on her palms. "I love you, Faith. Not despite your scars, but including them, they're part of what made you the woman I admire so deeply. I want to build a life with you if you'll have me." Faith's smile, that miraculous expression that had first broken Isaac's heart, spread across her face, lighting her eyes with a joy he'd once thought he might never witness. "I never thought I'd hear those words again and believe them," she whispered. "But I do believe you, Isaac, and I love you too." Their kiss sealed the promise between them, tender yet passionate, a beginning rather than an ending. They married in November, a small ceremony in the Rivercross Church with Sheriff Donovan and his wife as witnesses. Faith wore a simple blue dress, her dark hair adorned with wildflowers Isaac had carefully preserved from the summer meadows. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac kissed her without hesitation, proud to show the world that this remarkable woman had chosen him. Spring found them expanding the ranch house, adding rooms for the family they hoped to create together. Faith's garden doubled in size, promising abundance for the coming seasons. Isaac's cattle herd grew, the Caldwell brand becoming known for quality throughout the territory. One evening, as they stood surveying their thriving homestead, Faith rested her head against Isaac's shoulder, her hand absently cradling the gentle swell of her belly where their first child grew. "You ever think about that stormy day?" she asked softly. "When you found me under that rock?" Isaac's arm tightened around her waist. "I thank God for that broken wagon wheel every day." Faith laughed, the sound carrying freely across the land that had become their sanctuary. "And I thank him for the stubborn cowboy who wouldn't leave a stranger in the rain." "Not stubborn," Isaac corrected, turning to look into the eyes of the woman who had become his world. "Just couldn't bear the thought of you facing those storms alone." Faith reached up, tracing the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "No more storms alone for either of us." As twilight descended over the Wyoming plains, Isaac Caldwell held his wife close, marveling at how the broken pieces of two wounded hearts had formed something stronger than either could have achieved alone. The girl with scars had become a woman of strength and joy, and the lonely cowboy had found a love worth every risk. Together they had built not just a home, but a future one where scars were badges of survival rather than marks of shame, and where smiles, once rare and precious, now came as naturally as breathing.